I think it's time to prepare ourselves as LSU fans for the LSU transfer portal nightmare scenario.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, y'all? Welcome into Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check us out on YouTube as well. Just search Locked On LSU in that search bar. Hit the subscribe button, and then you'll get notified as soon as new Locked On LSU content drops. So you'll get up to date information from the podcast. Want to get into what I view as the nightmare scenario in the transfer portal for LSU this offseason. But first, I got to let y'all know that today's edition of Locked on LSU is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on today to get started. So when I talk about transfer portal nightmare scenario, I guess the real transfer portal nightmare scenario is Garrett Nussmeier enters the transfer portal or Harold Perkins enters the transfer portal. No. None of that has happened and none of that will happen. Of course, as of April 30th, the transfer portal is closed and you'll see some more names trickle into the news dump here over the next couple of days. And we've seen it over the past couple of days of you just need to enter your name into the transfer portal by April 30th. Sometimes the news cycle is a little bit behind because you don't just snap your fingers and boom, you're in the transfer portal. It takes time. It takes processing of the paperwork, and then news gets out and the news gets circulated. So you'll see a couple of names come out over the next couple of days. But as of now, players can no longer enter the transfer portal, and we'll continue to get into the state of LSU's roster post transfer portal. Absolutely. So it's not that nightmare scenario. It's not players leaving via the transfer portal that is the nightmare scenario that I'm talking about. What I'm talking about here is players transferring to LSU nightmare scenario. And what I am talking about is if LSU does not land one of these top talent, high-end defensive tackles in the spring transfer portal window, that is a nightmare. Because we'll get into some of your questions on a mailbag later on this week. But one question that I got was, what happens if LSU doesn't get any D tackles in the transfer portal? You lose. There's no other way about it. I can't sugarcoat it for you. I can't look at the glass half full perspective for you because frankly, I don't think that there is optimism in that. You will not win very many football games, and your defense will not be very good if you don't land a defensive tackle and at least a quality defensive tackle in the transfer portal. And that's subjective. What you want to call quality is, you can say whatever you want about that. But the fact of the matter is, you don't have enough talent or experience at that position to be able to be a serious contender. And I think that's what we all kind of want this team or hope that this team can be. And frankly, I think some of us expect this team to be. Because my goodness, I can't go through another season of an elite offense and a horrendous defense. I can't do it. Truly, my heart won't make it through. My heart, my soul, my everything, my being, I can't do it. But it all comes down to landing a quality defensive tackle in the transfer portal. And I don't know how great of news that we've gotten on that front recently. I mentioned in a podcast earlier this week that Dominic Williams, defensive tackle at TCU, he is the second-rated defensive line transfer in the spring transfer portal period, and it depends on whatever recruiting site that you use. A lot of them have him as the first. So the best defensive lineman in the spring transfer portal window, and obviously he's going to get wined and dined by several other programs. We know that Dominic Williams went to Texas and Oklahoma and Missouri before he went to LSU, was at LSU over the weekend. Everything that I have heard is that Dominic Williams, it's probably more of a pipe dream and a long shot that he ends up at LSU than it is a realistic reality. Now, I did see the video of him at the supper club in Baton Rouge with the signs and the whatever those are called, sparklers, fireworks, whatever the heck they're called, blow torches. I don't know. Not the most comfortable video to watch, I'm gonna be honest. Don't love that. Maybe let's put that on the back burner for future recruiting trips. Just my take here. You might have loved it. Won't yuck your yum. But it's looking like Dominic Williams will not be an LSU Tiger. I think that would have been pie in the sky best case scenario. A guy that has a lot of experience, that still has eligibility remaining, that has a really impressive resume, has great size, and has developed so much throughout his first 2 seasons at TCU. But let's go ahead and move on and operate under the reality that he will more than likely be an Oklahoma Sooner over an LSU Tiger. So let's move on. Simeon Barrow is another one that we've been looking at, a defensive lineman out of Michigan State who has entered the transfer portal. I believe that is still in play. Um, they would never tell you this, but I'm just using my own personal judgment that if I was doing the recruiting, if I was coaching this team, Dominic Williams would be my number one target. Damian Barrow would probably be behind that. But look, at this point, if you're not going to get Dominic Williams, then it doesn't matter where he is on your board. You got to move on to the next one. So Simeon Barrow, I believe, is still in play, but also everything that I have heard leads me to believe that he's in no rush to make up his mind. And I think that we've seen that, LSU is not going to necessarily wait around forever to wait for a player to make up their mind and make up their decision. I mean, LSU in the 2025 recruiting class said, look, James Simon, if you're not going to commit, then we got to move on. We got to find another running back to add to this class. We're not going to sit back and wait around for you forever just for you to commit to another school. And it is, like I said, it's nightmare scenario if you don't land one of these guys. So I don't know how long you can just wait around for Simeon Barrow to continue to take some of these trips. I believe if he hasn't already visited Missouri, then that's next on his list. Because Missouri was another one of those schools who was high on Dominic Williams, who is in need of defensive tackles. And think about how Missouri feels right now. They lost Blake Baker. They lost Kevin Peoples. They got a lot of question marks defensively. So not great news on Dominic Williams. It's, the hope is still alive for Simeon Barrow, but how long is he going to take to make up his mind? So that's what I don't know. And at what point do you have to say, look, we got to pivot and we got to find someone else? And if you do say, okay, we've got to pivot and we've got to find someone else because we can't wait for you to continue to take all of these visits and then make up your mind maybe a month from now, how steep is the drop off from the top tier of talent at that position to the next tier that you would most likely have to target? And not even just the talent, but overall the situations, injury history, remaining eligibility, amount of experience, size. Not all of these prospects are going to be perfect, but the higher prospects begin to dwindle and commit elsewhere, you kind of have to not be as picky and choosy because you need a body there. We're not talking about depth. We're talking about a starter. And that's what scares me. Is because last season, LSU recruited players out of the transfer portal in the secondary from traditionally schools that aren't as competitive, and let's be frank, aren't as good at LSU as LSU. Look at Deuce Chestnut from Syracuse. Syracuse defensive backs traditionally are not the same level of defensive back and physicality and speed and size as LSU. Deuce Chestnut didn't work out. Zy Alexander, all respect in the world to Zy Alexander because I think that dude is a freaking, tough as nails little warrior. He came from Southeastern. It's not the same level of competition. And we saw how much the secondary struggled. We know that this is a league that is won and lost in the trenches. And if you don't have enough beef talent on the defensive line, you're not going to win. I love Kevin Peoples and what he can do and what he can bring, and Bo Davis and what he can do for this defensive line. But I'll reiterate the same point that I've made several times before. They cannot wave a magic wand and make something out of nothing or something out of not a lot. They need talent to work with. They can get you the most out of an individual player. But some players' ceilings are lower than others. So I think we need to start preparing ourselves for what comes next if and when Dominic Williams and Simeon Barrow, the defensive tackles from TCU and Michigan State, respectively, don't end up at LSU. I do want to continue this conversation coming up next. I want to focus in on a prospect, a player in the transfer portal that now that LSU has some scholarships available, could be a player at a position of need to add in this spring transfer portal window. We'll get into that coming up next after just a few words from our sponsors. Okay, I want to tell you about Monopoly Go. Game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You've already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. There's unique stickers that you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, or there's cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with. There's hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you smash their buildings or you heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every single day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine, and there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything that you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now. It's free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. All right, rolling along here, locked on LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Do you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every single day. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. Thank you again for making us your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, so going into the spring transfer portal period, Brian Kelly told us, and this is something that I brought up several times, but I think it's worth repeating. Brian Kelly told us like it's going to be defensive tackle. That's basically the only position group that we're going to be focusing in on. But LSU had a handful, probably maybe even more than anticipated players, scholarship players on the roster enter the transfer portal. And I'm going to do a breakdown of that now the transfer portal is over, so stay tuned. But overall, it's not a concern to me overall. Is it a little bit concerning? Sure. Yeah, it's not nothing at all, but it's not like an absolute deal breaker for me. The players that LSU lost in the transfer portal. It freed up space for more scholarships, perhaps more than we anticipated. At least I anticipated. So now, initially, if you would have thought that you would have had, let's say, just throwing a number out there, two scholarships available to add two defensive tackles, well, now you have more to offer, maybe even more position groups. Because defensive tackle is not the only position of need. It's just the most dire, the most pressing, and the most important position of need because he ain't got anybody on the roster that can fill in that starting role. So now that LSU has more scholarships available, why not target other positions of need in addition to defensive tackle? Does anyone feel good about LSU's depth at cornerback? Does anyone feel very encouraged about the secondary? I understand that Corey Raymond is back, and I understand that when you got the architect of DBU back coaching your DBs, you're going to feel pretty good about it. And I understand that they picked up some nice pieces in the transfer portal. Jordan Gilbert, the safety out of Texas A&M, is one that I'm really juiced about. But overall, I don't feel great about the secondary and more specifically, the corners. I had somebody who went to a bunch of different spring games across the SEC, watched a ton of tape from different spring games, and they told me LSU has the worst secondary by far of any spring game that I've watched. Now, of course, take it with a grain of salt. It's a spring game. A lot of things change. Players transfer in, players transfer out. There's no pass rush, so obviously it's going to be tougher on the secondary, but that's the case for every team that this person watched. And LSU's was the worst. So I wasn't really even really feeling good about the secondary going into it, but even that makes me even more concerned. So let's keep an eye on a player that I believe could be in play. Now, this is not me reporting anything. This is not me saying that LSU absolutely is in play for this player or how high on their priority this player is. I just think it would make sense. It's Cormani McLean. He is the sophomore corner transferring out of Colorado. Now, this past weekend, he did post a graphic to his Twitter page that he has heard from LSU. Now, he's heard from a lot of other schools, from Texas and Georgia and Texas A&M and USC. So it's not just you. But also, that might even make you feel a little bit more encouraged that it's not just you, that there are a lot of other schools, schools within your league and new schools in the league in Texas and Oklahoma that are targeting this kid. The reason why I kind of focus in on Cormani McLean is because he's from Lakeland, Florida, right around the Orlando area. Who do we know that has great relationships within the state of Florida? He's done a heck of a job recruiting in the state of Florida, specifically that position, Corey Raymond. The reason why I was so excited about Corey Raymond coming back, now I have questions about coaching because his secondaries the last 4 years, frankly, they've been bad. Florida and LSU, and his last 2 seasons at LSU wasn't very good. But it's the relationships that I was excited about. It was the recruiting that I was excited about. It was the fact that Corey Raymond is a 4 and 5-star magnet. Players love him. Coaches love him. Parents love him. And Cormani McLean, I have very good sources that tell me that Cormani McLean has a good relationship with Corey Raymond. That Cormani McLean, obviously true freshman this past season, he was recruited by Florida when Corey Raymond was at Florida. So you have that foundation of a relationship already built up. And Cormani McLean has, I believe, 3 years of eligibility at least. Played in 6 games this past season, so he would have 3 years of eligibility. But he got 6 games of Pac-12 experience. Cormani McLean spent this past season at Colorado. 6 games, 13 tackles, 6 of them solos, 2 pass deflections. Not a world beater. Not the greatest season of any cornerback out there, but I don't need that to necessarily be the case. Because if he was a freshman this past season and a team in Colorado that frankly struggled in the latter 75% of the season, I don't expect him to be a world beater. But just the sheer talent and God-given ability, the height, the length, the speed, it fits what LSU wants to become and rather go back to. So I think that might be a player to focus in on, a player to keep an eye on. Now he has to want to come to LSU. I know he was looking at a lot of local schools in the state of Florida, maybe even staying out west. I almost said in Pac-12 schools, wherever the hell they're now, they're playing. Perhaps Utah might be a potential landing spot. So he has to want to come to LSU. But I think it might be one to keep an eye on. And it would be one that I would be more than happy to and more than welcome to the possibility of bringing into LSU's roster. Because like a former NFL general manager once told me, you never have too many corners. And I think we learned our lesson the hard way with that this past season. All right, let's transition into baseball. LSU has a big series this week. I mean, every series is big at this point. I mean, Lord. LSU is hosting Texas A&M over the weekend, the number 1 team in the country. Oh, how the turntables. What's so critical about this weekend for LSU? We'll get into that coming up next after just a couple of words from our sponsors. All right, I want to tell you about Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip off. So if you're an NBA fan out there and you are looking at some of the playoff ticket prices and they're astronomical and they're out of your budget, be patient. And check the Game Time app because Game Time has the best price guaranteed. I mean, I would love to make it up to Boston for a Celtics game. I just feel like any playoff experience in Boston would be an absolute blast. I can't, but if I could, I would go to Game Time to get me some C's tickets. But take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, always guaranteed. All right, thanks again for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. We've got a big baseball series coming up this weekend. LSU hosting the number one team in the country in Texas A&M. And it is crazy, like this time last year, roles were reversed. Number one LSU team, a team that just seemed like nothing could knock them off of that high of being the number one team in the country. Fast forward to now, Texas A&M is I think number one by a mile, frankly, because they're the most complete team that we've seen in college baseball. And maybe that's not the fairest thing of me to say because I literally only watch SEC baseball. But, if you're the best in the SEC, a lot of times that means you're probably the best in the country. LSU hosting Texas A&M, first game Friday. It's Friday, Saturday, Sunday series. So let's talk postseason because it's not a hope that LSU traditionally makes the postseason. It's an expectation, especially when you're coming off of a national championship year. And I get it. They lost Dylan Cruz and Paul Skeens and a lot of other things. But you lose the number one and number two picks in the Major League Baseball draft. Lose a Golden Spikes Award winner. Best pitcher in college baseball. One of the best pitchers in the history of college baseball. I get it. You lost a lot of talent. You lost a lot of veteran presence. You lost your leaders. I understand. You don't lose that and get better. But the expectation at LSU is you lose that and then you reload. Obviously, that's not the case. If LSU wants to make it to the postseason, kind of the line of demarcation is traditionally 13 conference wins. LSU currently sits at 7 conference wins. You have 3 series left, 9 games. So you have 9 games to win 6. Now, I'm no mathematician. I'm not a numbers girly. But 6 wins in 9 games isn't necessarily the trajectory that we have seen this team on. You need to win a couple of these games. You've got Texas A&M, the number one team in the country. You've got Alabama, and you've got Ole Miss. And I think Ole Miss is a team that should be beatable. But you couldn't sweep Missouri, and you couldn't sweep Auburn. Right now, those are 2 of the worst, if not the 2 worst teams in the SEC. I know that beating Texas A&M is hard. They're number one for a reason. But you couldn't find a way to sweep Missouri, and you couldn't find a way to sweep Auburn. Those are 2 wins that are incredibly valuable for your path to the postseason. So now you have to make that up. You couldn't find a way to win a game at Tennessee. Just 1 win there. And we're talking about a different ballgame. No pun intended. So A&M, Alabama, Ole Miss. You cannot get swept this weekend. If you get swept this weekend, you're done. You're not making the postseason. You might not even get to Hoover. Can you find a way to pick up a series win here? I get it. Okay? I understand. It's hard. But if I'm asking this team that didn't win a series until week 6 to win their next 3 series. That's a lot of hope and a lot of wishing. And I don't feel great about that. But that's what you have to do if you want to get to the postseason. So it's going to be a tough series this weekend against a Texas A&M team that is buzzing at the plate, on the mound. They're such a well-rounded team. And hats off to Texas A&M coach Jim Schlossnagle for what he's been able to build in just a few short years in College Station. But if you want to find yourself in the postseason, you're going to have to bear down and win some of these tough series. You're going to have to play that complementary baseball that we saw LSU play against Missouri and Auburn. You're going to have good pitching days and good days at the plate. You cannot be leaving 2, 3 runners in scoring position every single inning. You cannot be doing that. You have to take advantage and match good performances with other good performances in different areas of the game. Because if you don't, I reiterate the same sentiment that I started the show with about defensive tackles. If you don't, then you lose, and you will not get to the postseason. Do I think this team's going to go back-to-back and win another College World Series? Hell no, I don't. But just find your way in the dance. Give yourself an opportunity. That's what I want to see. So it's going to be a tough series. Friday, Saturday, Sunday at the box against number one team Texas A&M. That's going to do it for me today. We'll be back tomorrow I had a bunch of mailbags and I haven't gotten to get to those questions yet. So we will get to that coming up on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU.